Today, I will be discussing about globalization, technology, and homogenization, the globalizer's dilemma. I am Dr. Christine Carmela R. Ramos from the Mapua University, Department of Arts and Letters. Aside from being a professor of De La Salle University, the Philippine Women's University, and currently a professor of Mapua University, I have published articles and books such as Introduction to Philosophy and Globalization and Technology. Scott presupposed that globalization must be seen in part at least as the outcome of an idea, and specifically the idea of free market. Free in the sense of freed from all political and social constraints. By 1920, global systems of finance capital and of international relations had been established, and mass production had become the predominant pattern of industrial organization. The combination of technological advancements, the opening and dominance of world markets, the campaign of worldwide implementation of the neoliberal development paradigm, of the regulation and liberalization and intensifying business competition that has resulted in a worldwide economic restructuring and integration are called globalization. With the expansion of trade, more money was called. Large-scale commerce could not be carried out by barter, as much as the early trade had been. Gold and silver from the New World helped and meet the end. Banks began to extend their influence and responsibility in order to deal with large increases in the volume of money and the development of the credit system. Insurance companies were recognizing the need of statistics for figuring risks. By the end of the 17th century, Europe had a large accumulation of capital. Money had to be available before machinery and steam engines could come into wide use, for they were costly to manufacture and install. The computer assumed an increasingly central place in scientific research and data processing. Before the 15th century, the reduction of mental toil could not be considered to have been a very pressing need. Drudgery in this form came in large part as an accompaniment to the accumulation of great wealth in the capitalist societies and the application of mathematics to the unfolding problems of new science. Heidegger points, everywhere the computer is assuming an increasingly central place in scientific research, and data processing is becoming all-important. Whether this will be results of a research, joint projects, particular methodologies, knowledge and talents of research workers that can be readily shared. Heidegger points to the fact that all the sciences are now being drawn into the domain occupied by sciences. For example, biology is transforming itself into biophysics, anthropology into astrophysics. Today, cybernetics, that statistical study that aims at controlling the flow of information in particular system, is, according to Heidegger, the place where all the sciences meet. The computer and other devices were mainly used during the coronavirus lockdown, for instance, that mobilized the population to take the threat seriously and change its normal behavior drastically and immediately to break the chain of virus transmission. This is the step at which the Philippines or other governments such as New Zealand eschewed incremental mitigation strategies and immediately adopting very strong restrictions in an effort to eliminate, not just mitigate, community transmission of the virus. Equally important are the changes that have taken place in the social realm. Traditional societies are typically closed and rigid in their structure. The members of such societies are primarily peasants living in relatively isolated villages, poor and illiterate. Modern knowledge and the technology, however, has created an immense impact on this traditional way of life. In a modern society, two-thirds or more of the population lives in cities. Health has improved. Indeed, modernization, for instance in Malaysia, is seen as part of the universal experience. This universal experience are also shared by some of our views that we closely share with Malaysia and other Asian neighbors, such as Orang kita, bangsa kita, meaning our people. The collective views or the group or team mentality that the Malaysians call Jemaah, courage or kagitingan, or the Malaysians call as Berani Kerana Benar, our concept of bayanihan or cooperation, which the Malaysians call as kerjasama, or the respect for elders, which the Malaysian call as menghormati orang tua. The Philippine workforce is composed of diverse Indo-Malayan ethno-linguistic groups scattered over many islands. Local work values are a product of the historical blending of ideas, beliefs, and customs of these ethno-linguistic groups, along with more than 330 years of Spanish colonial dominance and 45 years of American rule. However, the more widely publicized examples of children begging in the streets and kidnapping added to the general perception of lawlessness in the land. The atmosphere of fear and uncertainty had affected everyone. In terms of Filipino psyche, it means a further diminished sense of nationhood, shrinking our stature even more in the community of nations and enhancing our reputation as the sick man of the region. And this is according to the Philippine Star Week editorial in year 2003. However, because of the Filipino beliefs of moral, religious, and relational dimensions, there is room for optimism, encouraging us to share ourselves to a wider reality, thus promoting harmony. As a saying by the Taoist Lao Tzu and Chuang Tzu, the way of the sage is to act but not to compete. We are immersed in a paradoxical situation. On the other hand, the weight of nationalisms or regionalisms contribute to reinforce the type of individualism that excludes the other, be it the other human being or the other group. In other words, while events in any part of the world will increasingly have consequences for or be referenced against events in other distant parts, this relativization may not always be positive. Indeed, the world as a system may well be driven by conflicts that are far more intractable than the previous disputes between nations. For my personal thoughts, although our understanding of things and ourselves are resources to be ordered, enhanced, and used efficiently that has been building up since Plato, according to Martin Heidegger, we are not stuck with that understanding. For Heidegger, once we realize that technology is our latest understanding of who we are in our practices, not just as a matter of reflection, we have stepped out of the technological understanding of being. We then see that what is most important in our lives is not subject to efficient enhancement. Indeed, the drive to control everything is precisely what we do not control. This transformation in our sense of reality, this overcoming of thinking in terms of values and calculation, is precisely what Heideggerian thinking seeks to bring about. Efficiency for its own sake is not the only end for humanity, dictated by reality itself, but just our current understanding. In other words, Heidegger wants to think about being without basing his thoughts on beings at all. And he wants the question of truth to form part of this project. In this presentation, globalization was given a new meaning. It is not just about amassing material things or people, but our relationship with others, ourselves, and with nature. Globalization is a choice. It is a commitment, our determination and perseverance, which is more an effort of the heart than mind alone. From my study of Heidegger, technology, and globalization, I concur with Marcuse's vision, particularly with regard to my own outlook of globalization, namely, that the goal of self-authentic self-determination by the individual is to be stripped of technological rationality in its exploitative feature, that is, the sole standard and guide in planning and developing the available resources for all. Let me emphasize that I am not rejecting rationality per se, but simply the dominant tendencies of modern culture toward an ever more rational world. In its ever greater expansion, the rational mind increasingly devalued that which was not rational and claimed that reason was synonymous with the rational. There are so many other contemporary issues regarding our society that Heidegger will call as a concrete example of the essence of technology. For instance, the creation and destruction as posed by the documentary films of Al Gore and the advocacy of Senator Lauren Legarda. It discusses how one person can contribute to either the improvement of our environments or be aware of what is happening to our climate caused by human intervention. Though Anaximander, an ancient Greek, already talked about the opposite forces, genesis, and ultimate destruction caused by imbalance in nature. In this presentation, I am calling for each one of us as part of this globalizing world. We are part of this call for change, especially from our experience of the COVID-19 pandemic. What happened in different countries during the pandemic, also whether this is the Yolanda or Katrina hurricanes, are not done overnight by one person. As such, the issue of climate change or the COVID-19 pandemic calls for international cooperation in research and treatises. Well, I have experienced the effects of COVID-19 in our village. I have also experienced Ondoy flooding myself. And I asked those questions about the unbelievable changes happening. And hence, I agree with Heidegger and others to stop destroying nature, minimize greed and waste to avoid havoc in our lives and properties. To sum it up, globalization is viewed in this presentation as a key concept by which we understand the transition of human society into the third millennium. In this vein, my presentation attempted to look into the process of globalization and its central feature, technology. Issues of globalization and the implications of technology are brought into play, employing crucial viewpoints of Martin Heidegger. His thoughts offer analytic tools that contribute to a critical understanding of the multidimensional effects, risks, and possibilities brought about by modernity and its globalization. For Heidegger, the distinction between beings and our own representations is becoming harder and harder to maintain. In the modern age, everyday existence is so impoverished and corrupted that what we need is a radical revolution in our relationship to being itself. This paper suggested that philosophy should not retreat from the leading aspects of daily life and experience. Rather, philosophical discourse could facilitate in envisioning a global community that laid emphasis on a non-violent social and political transformation vis-a-vis science and technology. In conclusion, our experience of globalization is indigenously Filipino, philosophically and culturally speaking. Though we were influenced by the Spaniards, our core can be traced to the Filipinos' journey toward oneness with God that deepens and broadens the meaning of God in the lives of the people. Further, the three dimensions of moral, religious, and relational are connected with the Filipinos' transpersonal view of the world. That is, the self is governed by personal being, and that goods should be for the advancement of many. Thank you, and please send your comments and queries through my email.